"What the hell do you think you're doing?" The words tore through the nursery like a whip crack. Edward James stood frozen in the doorway, briefcase in hand, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the woman breastfeeding his daughter. His maid, his child, one act he couldn't explain, one line she was never meant to cross. Sandra didn't move. Her arms tightened around the baby, but she didn't flinch. Evelyn was breathing easier now, cheeks flushed with color, her tiny hand resting against Sandra's chest. Peaceful. Safe. But Edward didn't see peace. He saw betrayal, raw, intimate, uninvited. "What is this?" he barked. "Are you pretending you're her mother now?" Sandra looked up at him, eyes tired but steady, her voice barely above a whisper. She wouldn't eat. She was slipping. I didn't know what else to do. Silence. Not the kind that fills a house when no one's home, but the kind that fills a room right before something breaks. And in that moment something did, because this wasn't just about a baby, it was about grief, it was about instincts, it was about a man who hadn't held his daughter since the day his wife died, and a woman who couldn't watch another child fade away, not after what she'd lived through. What started as outrage would unravel everything, and somewhere in the middle of it all, a little girl would speak one word, a word that would rewrite what family means in this house. If this moment gripped your heart even a little, then stay with us, because what comes next isn't just about a baby or a billionaire. It's about healing the kind of pain that doesn't show up in hospital records. It's about the kind of love you don't plan for, but fight to keep. So before we go deeper, take a second, subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. You never know who needs to believe, like Edward did, that kindness doesn't follow rules. It follows the heart. The crying had started just after noon. By late afternoon, it hadn't stopped. Evelyn's little body twisted weakly in Sandra's arms, her voice no longer piercing, just dry, broken, thin. The formula bottle sat untouched on the dresser, now lukewarm, just like the last three. The nanny had vanished without a word. Again. And in a house full of ceilings too high and rooms too quiet, the sound of a baby slowly fading was the loudest thing of all. Sandra Baker, 29, had seen messes before, scrubbed them, picked up pieces other people left behind. But this wasn't a stain on marble. This wasn't a broken dish. This was a child slipping. She tried everything, rocking, pacing, humming that old hymn her grandmother used to sing during storms. Evelyn wouldn't settle, wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, just a soft, gasping whimper, over and over again. Sandra checked the bottle again, hands shaking, still full, still rejected. A wave of helplessness crashed over her chest, tight, heavy, too familiar. She glanced down at the baby's lips, pale, dry. Her eyelids fluttered like she was running out of strength. That's when it happened. A pressure, low, familiar, awake in her body like something it had been waiting for. Milk. Sandra froze. It had been 5 months since she weaned her daughter, Brielle. 5 months since her body had anything left to give, or so she thought. She stared at Evelyn. This wasn't her child. This wasn't her right. But it wasn't about her. It was about a baby in distress, a child starving under a roof full of silence, and a mother who'd once sat in an ER hallway while nurses looked through her as her own baby nearly died. Her hands moved before her mind caught up. She sat in the nursery glider, slowly, carefully, as if stepping into something sacred. Her fingers trembled as they undid the top buttons of her blouse. She brought Evelyn to her chest, heart racing, breath caught. The baby latched, instantly, like her body had been waiting for this moment too. Sandra exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Relief hit hard, almost like grief. She held Evelyn close, one hand behind her head, the other cradling her back. The baby's fists relaxed, her breathing evened out. Sandra closed her eyes. She didn't think about consequences. She didn't think about roles. She thought about survival, about mercy, about what it means to save someone quietly when no one else sees. She whispered, "You're okay now, baby girl. Just eat." And for a moment, The house felt still, whole, until the door creaked. Sandra looked up, and there he was, Edward James, standing in the doorway, suit still crisp from the plane, eyes wide, briefcase hanging at his side like he'd forgotten he was holding it. His gaze dropped to the baby, then to her, then back again. The silence stretched, and then his voice broke it, hard, cold, loud enough to make the walls flinch. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The words slammed into the room like a door kicked open. Sandra didn't flinch. She only adjusted her grip around the baby, gentle, protective, as if shielding Evelyn not just from the man in the doorway, but from everything he couldn't understand. Edward stepped inside, jaw tight, eyes burning. "I asked you a question." Evelyn stirred but didn't cry. Her small cheek still rested peacefully against Sandra's chest, her breath warm, steady. Sandra finally looked up. "She wouldn't eat," she said quietly. "She was getting weaker. I had to—" "You had to what?" he snapped. "Breastfeed her, like you're her mother?" His voice cracked at the word mother, like it carried too much weight, too much history. Sandra held his stare. She needed milk. She needed something. She was fading, Mr. James. "That's not your call." "No," she said. "But I made it." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pulsed, thick with grief, pride, confusion, and something neither of them wanted to name. Edward looked down at his daughter, at the slow rise and fall of her chest, at the soft drop of milk on her lip. His mouth opened, then closed again. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Not like this. Not here. Not with her. "She's my daughter," he said, voice low now, but rough. "Not yours." "I know," Sandra whispered, "but right now, she's alive, because someone acted." The words hit something in him he didn't want touched. He looked away. The last time he held Evelyn, she was minutes old, wrapped in a hospital blanket. His wife had just died on the table, and the baby, this baby, had screamed like her tiny lungs were already grieving too. He hadn't touched her since. Not really. Work had been safer, easier. The cold precision of business didn't cry in the middle of the night, didn't need warmth he no longer knew how to give. And now here was Sandra, doing the thing he couldn't, loving his daughter in a way he hadn't allowed himself to try. Edward took a breath, the kind that sounds like it hurts coming in. "You think I don't care," he said, softer now. Sandra's voice didn't waver. "I think you're scared. I think you lost your wife and locked the rest of your heart in with her. I think you stopped trying." He looked up, eyes sharp. "Don't psychoanalyze me." "I'm not," she said. "I'm telling you what I see." And what she saw was a man holding a storm behind his ribs, one more gust away from collapse. Evelyn made a small noise, half sigh, half contentment. Edward's eyes dropped to her again, and for a second he didn't see the act. He saw the result. She was safe, fed, alive. His lips parted to speak, but nothing came. Sandra reached for a small blanket and gently covered herself, adjusting the baby without breaking eye contact. "You want to fire me," she said. "Go ahead, but don't you dare say I didn't care." Edward didn't move. The house around them stayed quiet, walls too proud to echo, too used to silence to know what to do with the truth. And in the middle of it all, a baby slept, unaware of the war she'd just interrupted. The house had gone quiet again, but not the peaceful kind, the kind that settles in after an argument, thick, unspoken, waiting to explode all over again. Sandra stood in the kitchen hours later, rinsing out a bottle that Evelyn still wouldn't touch. The baby was asleep now, belly full, cheeks pink. For the first time in 2 days, her breathing was soft, even. Edward hadn't said another word since the confrontation, just disappeared into his office and closed the door like it was a shield. Sandra didn't expect him to understand, but part of her still hoped he would try. The hallway creaked behind her. She didn't turn around. "I don't want an apology," she said quietly, drying the bottle. "I'm not here to give one," Edward replied. I just need to know why. Sandra wiped her hands on her apron and finally faced him. You want to know why I did it? She asked, voice low. Because I've been here before, not in this house, not with your baby, but in a waiting room holding my own daughter while her skin turned blue. Edward blinked. She kept going. Brielle was born early. 5 weeks. Her lungs weren't strong enough. We waited for hours in the ER while the nurses passed us by like we were furniture. I asked for help. I begged. They looked at my insurance card, looked at my skin, and told me to wait. She paused, just long enough to keep breathing. They almost killed her with their waiting. Edward's face shifted. Just a flicker. Something cracked behind his eyes. Sandra leaned against the counter, arms crossed, holding herself together. Do you know what it's like to watch your child go still in your arms, to scream and have no one come, to wonder if maybe your baby's not dying fast enough for them to care? She swallowed hard, looked him straight in the eye. So, when I saw Evelyn today, dry lips, empty stomach, no one coming, I didn't see your baby. I saw mine. The words landed hard between them. Edward glanced toward the nursery. His jaw worked, but no sound came. She's not yours, he finally said. You said it yourself. Sandra nodded. And that's exactly why it mattered, because no one else was there, and I wasn't going to stand in this house and watch another baby fade. Silence again. But this time it wasn't cold. It was heavy, honest. Edward ran a hand through his hair, eyes fixed on the marble floor like it had answers he didn't. I don't know how to hold her, he said, almost to himself. Every time I try, I feel like I'm going to break. Sandra's voice softened. She doesn't need you to be strong. She needs you to be there. He didn't reply. He just stood there, looking like a man caught between two versions of himself. One that had shut the world out, and one that didn't know how to open the door back up. The silence stretched, but this time it didn't feel like the end of something. It felt like the beginning of something breaking. So something else could come through. The next morning arrived without warning. No alarm, no plan, just a restless man wandering through his own house like a stranger. Edward stepped into the kitchen out of habit, more than hunger. The silence still clung to the walls, but it felt different now, not hollow. He didn't expect anyone else to be awake. So when he saw the little girl standing on a step stool, pouring cereal into a chipped pink bowl, he froze. She noticed him right away, but didn't flinch. She just offered a quiet, curious smile. Hi. Edward blinked. Hello. I'm Brielle, she said, adjusting the milk carton with both hands. I help my mom here. He watched her with narrowed eyes, not with suspicion, just surprise. Sandra hadn't mentioned a daughter, not once. You're Sandra's child? He asked. She nodded, still focused on her cereal, like this was the most natural thing in the world. I stay after school sometimes, only when Mom works late. I don't get in the way. Her tone wasn't defensive, it was practiced, like it wasn't the first time she had to justify being where she wasn't technically allowed. Edward said nothing. He just stood there watching this small, neat girl. Braids freshly tied, socks mismatched, eyes older than her age, move with the quiet confidence of someone used to staying invisible. Brielle slid off the stool and carried her bowl to the table. Before she sat down, she glanced at the baby monitor resting near the fruit bowl. A soft rustling sound came through, Evelyn just stirring. You check on her too? Edward asked before he could stop himself. Brielle shrugged. She cries sometimes, not a lot, just when she's hungry or lonely. Babies get lonely too. The simplicity of it hit him harder than it should have. She sat down and began to eat, legs swinging gently under the chair. For a few seconds, Edward just stood there, unsure of what to say or how to leave. Then something caught his eye. A plush bunny, one Evelyn's mother had bought before she was born, sat on the counter beside Brielle's backpack. Its long ears were newly tied with a blue ribbon. Is that hers? He asked, pointing. Brielle nodded between spoonfuls. She likes it. I told her she could have it. Edward raised an eyebrow. You don't mind sharing? She looked up at him, eyes soft. She's kinda like my little sister now. The words landed in the middle of his chest, simple, unfiltered, true. He didn't answer, didn't correct her, didn't tell her how complicated things were supposed to be, because in that moment it didn't feel complicated. It felt right. He watched her for another beat, then quietly turned, poured himself a cup of coffee, and sat at the far end of the table. Brielle hummed softly as she ate, a gospel lullaby, the same one Sandra had sung the day before, and in the stillness of that kitchen, morning light cutting across the marble, the warmth of milk and music hanging in the air, Edward felt something shift, not peace, not yet, but something gentler than grief, something dangerously close to hope. The house had settled into a hush, not the kind that felt heavy or sad, but the kind that made you pause, made you listen. Edward didn't mean to stop outside the nursery. He was just passing by on his way to the office, coffee in hand, another unread email open on his phone. But something caught his eye as he moved past the doorway, a flicker of light on glass. He stepped back. There, on the fogged-up nursery window, written in small uneven letters traced by a tiny finger, B.E. two simple letters, drawn just above the condensation line. He stared at them. At first, it made no sense. A child's scribble, maybe. Something meaningless. Until he saw what was resting on the windowsill below it, Brielle's plush bunny and Evelyn's pacifier, side by side. He looked again. B.E. Brielle. Evelyn. A quiet claim. A quiet bond. Two children, one finding the other. Edward stood there longer than he meant to, one hand still on the doorframe, the other tightening slightly around his coffee mug. Something inside him tugged, not loudly, not painfully, but persistent. He had spent the past 8 months building walls, schedules, boundaries, but he never kept close. Evelyn fed, clothed, safe. And now these two girls, one his by blood, the other by nothing but proximity and instinct, had found each other without permission or hesitation. He hadn't taught them to do that, but they'd done it anyway. He stepped into the nursery, slow, careful. The air still smelled faintly of lavender and baby powder. The rocker creaked gently in the corner, empty now, but still warm with memory. Edward traced the letters on the glass with his fingertip. They'd started to fade, already melting back into mist. He didn't rewrite them. He didn't wipe them away either. Just stood there, letting the quiet say what he couldn't. Behind him, he heard soft footsteps. Sandra's voice came gently. She did that this morning, she said. I told her not to write on windows, but... Edward turned halfway, eyes still on the letters. She wasn't trying to be defiant, Sandra added. She just wanted them together, even in writing. He didn't answer, because he wasn't thinking about discipline. He was thinking about how something so small could feel so big. 2 letters, 2 names. 2 girls finding family in a place where it didn't technically exist. He looked back at the window, then at the crib where Evelyn now slept curled beneath a pastel blanket, a wisp of hair clinging to her forehead. I haven't held her, he said suddenly, voice raw. Sandra didn't reply. I mean, I have, but not really. She waited. I thought if I stayed back, if I didn't get too close, I couldn't lose her too. His voice cracked on the last word. And just like that, the silence wasn't still anymore. It was thick, alive, holding things neither of them had ever said out loud. Sandra stepped into the room not too close, just enough. She's already yours, Edward, she said softly. You don't lose what you choose to hold. You only lose what you run from. Edward looked back at the window. The letters were nearly gone now, just faint outlines on glass. But he didn't need them to last forever. He'd already seen what he needed. The house was still at 2:07 a.m. No emails, no footsteps, just wind brushing against the windows and the faint hum of the refrigerator somewhere down the hall. Edward sat alone in his study, staring at a blank document on his laptop. He wasn't typing, hadn't typed for hours. The cursor blinked back at him like it knew. He had gone to bed once, but only stayed 10 minutes. Something kept pulling him back to the nursery. He rose quietly, like the walls might wake if he moved too fast. The hallway felt colder at night, longer, like it had its own kind of memory. When he reached the nursery, he didn't knock, didn't announce himself. He just opened the door and stopped. The light from the hallway spilled in, soft and gold, and what it landed on made his breath catch. They were on the floor, all three of them. Sandra was curled protectively around Evelyn, one hand resting gently over the baby's back, her face half buried in a pillow. Brielle was behind her, pressed against her mother's spine, small fingers clutching a corner of Sandra's shirt like it was an anchor. No one stirred, no one noticed him standing there. But he noticed everything. Evelyn's tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm with Sandra's. Brielle's leg twitching slightly in sleep. Sandra's arm stretched out just enough to cover them both. They looked like a single shape. Something whole. Something sacred. Edward didn't move, not at first. He just stood there, one hand on the doorknob, watching this silent miracle unfold right in front of him. It wasn't planned, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for a man who'd built his life around control, around precision, around not needing anyone, this image was unraveling. He stepped inside, careful not to let the floor creak, kneeled slowly beside them. Evelyn stirred, just a little, and Sandra instinctively for the small blanket draped over the armchair, shook it loose, gently laid it over them, smoothing the edge across Brielle's back. He didn't speak, didn't dare. He just sat there, close enough to feel their warmth, far enough not to disturb it. The silence wasn't hollow tonight, it was holy. He looked at Evelyn, his daughter, sleeping not because someone followed a schedule, but because someone held her through the chaos. He looked at Brielle, so sure of her place in this house even without permission. And he looked at Sandra, someone he'd almost fired 24 hours ago. Now here she was, saving his child, cradling a stranger's grief without asking for anything in return. Edward leaned back against the wall, arms folded, head tilted toward the ceiling. He didn't cry, but something inside him softened, not healed, not yet, but softened. He stayed there, on the floor, just breathing in time with the people he didn't know he needed, and for the first time in months, he didn't feel alone. The sun hadn't fully risen, just a soft grey light spilling through the kitchen window, brushing against the edge of the countertop, and the steam rising from two mismatched mugs. Sandra didn't sit. She stood by the stove, stirring oatmeal, barefoot and quiet. Edward was at the table, not across the room, not pacing, sitting, elbows on his knees, fingers laced like he was trying to hold something together. He hadn't planned to speak. He'd come down for coffee, maybe space, but then he saw her, hair tied up, robe wrinkled, humming under her breath like nothing about this house scared her anymore, and the words came. "I watched you sleep last night." Sandra didn't react, just kept stirring. "Not in a weird way," he added, almost awkward. "I came to check on Evelyn and you were all there, on the floor." She nodded once, still not turning around. "I covered you with a blanket," he said, "and then I just stayed." Silence, but not cold this time, just space being made. "I haven't told anyone this," he finally said, voice lower. "Not even my sister." Sandra stopped stirring. "She died in childbirth," he continued. "Kate, my wife." Sandra turned slightly, not enough to face him, but enough to listen with her whole body. "They told me I had to choose," he said. "Her or the baby. There were complications. I couldn't speak. I froze, and by the time I said her name, it was already done." He swallowed hard. The mug in front of him stayed untouched. "I didn't hold Evelyn that night. Couldn't. She felt like a reminder. A receipt I didn't ask for." His voice cracked, barely, but it did. "I thought if I stayed away I wouldn't feel it, wouldn't break." Sandra stepped away from the stove, sat across from him, folded her hands. "You didn't break," she said gently. "You hardened." He let out a shaky breath. "I didn't know how to hold her without falling apart," he whispered. Sandra nodded. "Then let yourself fall," she said. "That's the only way we ever learn how to hold something right." He looked up at her, really looked. No walls, no control. Just a man unraveling at the seams in the safest place he'd ever sat. She pushed the mug toward him. He didn't drink, just wrapped his hands around the warmth like he needed to feel something alive. "You saved her," he said. Sandra didn't flinch. "I held her," she said. "You save her. Every day from now on." They sat in silence. The house creaked gently around them, like it too was exhaling for the first time in months, and somewhere upstairs, a baby's soft cry echoed through the monitor. Neither of them moved. Not yet. Not because they didn't care, but because for the first time they knew they wouldn't have to do this alone. The sun was high by noon. The patio didn't feel like a museum piece. The table was cluttered. Juice boxes, napkins, a bowl of grapes no one was eating. Wind moved through the trees, brushing leaves across the stone tiles, and laughter, actual laughter, danced through the air. Sandra sat beside Brielle, wiping a smudge of peanut butter off her daughter's chin. Edward was across from them, rocking Evelyn gently in his lap, the baby's tiny fingers clinging to one of his shirt buttons like it meant everything. Maybe it did. She looked at him now, not with confusion, not with hesitation, with trust. It had been 2 weeks since that morning in the kitchen, since he said it out loud, since he stopped pretending his heart wasn't buried under a year's worth of silence. Now he was trying. Messy, awkward, uneven, but trying. Brielle reached for her juice, knocked it over. The cup toppled, spilling lemonade across the table, pooling around the grapes, dripping slowly onto the patio floor. Sandra moved fast, grabbing napkins, already halfway out of her seat, but Brielle held up her hand. "I got it," she said quickly. Then turned to Evelyn, wide-eyed and serious. "It's okay, sissy," she added. "I'll clean it up. Your big sister's got this." The napkin in Sandra's hand froze mid-air. Edward stopped rocking. Even the baby seemed still for a moment, as if she heard it too. "Sissy." Just a word, but not just a word. Sandra looked up. Her eyes met Edward's. She didn't correct Brielle. Neither did he. Brielle hummed softly as she patted the table, cleaning up the spill like it was the most natural thing in the world. No one told her to call Evelyn that. No one rehearsed it. No one planned this moment. But it was real. Undeniably, beautifully real. Edward looked down at Evelyn. Her eyes fluttered open, blinking in the sunlight, lips parted in a sleepy smile. "She thinks of her as a sister," he said quietly. Sandra nodded. "She feels like one." There was no speech, no declaration, just an unspoken agreement hanging in the space between them. This wasn't about blood. It wasn't about what made sense on paper. It was about presence, about who showed up, who stayed, and who whispered sissy with juice on her fingers and love in her voice. Brielle finished wiping the table and popped a grape into her mouth, feet swinging under her chair. She looked proud of herself, completely unaware that she had just redrawn the lines of this family with one sentence. Edward leaned back in his chair, Evelyn still nestled against him. She'd stopped clinging now, she didn't need to. For the first time in her short life, she was being held by someone who wasn't afraid to stay. Sandra watched him, this man who once couldn't touch his own child, now sitting there with her resting safely in his arms. It didn't feel like a miracle, it felt like a choice. And the ripple of that choice had just reached the little girl beside her. The rain came softly that morning, not a storm, not a downpour, just a quiet drizzle tapping against the windows, as if the sky itself had decided to exhale. The house felt different now, lived in, not just cleaned and decorated, but inhabited, filled with small voices, soft footsteps, the clatter of dishes that no one rushed to silence. Edward stood in the study, sleeves rolled, sorting through old files on the desk that had once belonged to his wife.
Papers rustled, drawers creaked, dust lifted from things untouched for too long. And then he found it. A letter, folded, yellowed at the edges, her handwriting unmistakable. Kate. He sat down. Hands trembling, he unfolded it. If anything happens to me, don't disappear, Edward. Don't turn cold. Love her the way I won't get to. And if someone walks into her life, someone kind, someone steady, don't push them away because of pride or pain. Let her be loved, even when it's not by you.
He read the
His
words
chest
twice,
tightened.
then 3 times, not because he didn't understand them, but because he finally did. He rose slowly, walked down the hall and into the living room where the piano sat untouched, its surface still covered in framed photographs. Kate, their wedding day, a hospital photo of Evelyn moments old, and next to it, an empty frame, one he'd never filled, until now. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph, taken just yesterday by the housekeeper. Sandra in the garden, hair tied up, holding Evelyn on one hip, while Brielle leaned in with a sun hat far too big for her head. All 3 laughing, blurred by movement. Nothing posed, nothing perfect, just real. He placed it in the empty frame, right beside Kate. No replacement, just expansion. Later that afternoon, on the back porch swing, the wind picked up. Brielle was stretched out on a blanket with crayons and a storybook, humming a song only she seemed to know. Evelyn napped nearby in a portable bassinet, a pacifier bobbing gently between her lips. Sandra sat next to Edward. No conversation, no pressure, just shared breath. His hand rested between them on the wooden swing. Hers found it, slowly, quietly, like a decision. And he didn't move away. Inside the house, the piano keys sat untouched, but he'd play again. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Not for performance, not for legacy, just for them. Behind them, the framed photos caught the light, a past he could never rewrite, and a future he'd almost missed, until 2 girls wrote their names on a window and made him look again. He didn't need to speak. Not now. Not with Evelyn sleeping safely, Brielle humming softly, Sandra leaning just close enough to feel like home. Because some families aren't made by history. They're made by presence, by instinct, by a moment of courage when no one else stepped in. And sometimes, and they're built in silence, one breath, one choice, one hand held at a time.